they're going to collaborate. This lesson examines whether students are working with others on the learning activity and the quality of that collaboration. There are many different levels of collaboration, and we have to be aware of what level or type of collaboration we are expecting our students to engage with. Simply putting students into groups or pairs doesn't necessarily mean they're going to collaborate. The clearer we are about the type of collaboration we want our students to engage with, the more chance there is that they will develop the type of skills necessary to collaborate effectively. For example, if the learning activity is designed in a way that students have shared responsibility for their work and requires students to make substantive decisions together, then the students have the opportunity to develop and learn important collaboration skills. These include the skills of negotiation, conflict resolution, agreement on what must be done, distribution of tasks, listening to the ideas of others, and integration of ideas into a coherent whole. The strongest learning activities which will help students develop these collaborative skills are designed so that students' work is interdependent, requiring all students to contribute in order for the team to succeed. So when planning for collaboration, you need to consider the following. Are they working together? Do they have shared responsibility? Do they make substantive decisions? Is their work interdependent? Answering these questions will inform the design process for the learning activity. Perhaps what would be useful is to break down each of these questions individually. For collaboration to take place, students must work with others on the learning activity. Students also need to have shared responsibility for their work. Students also need to have the opportunity to make substantive decisions together. The strongest learning activities are designed so that students' work is interdependent, requiring all students to contribute in order for the team to succeed. But what do each of these big ideas look like in action in the classroom? When we refer to students working together, we mean that the learning activity requires them to work in pairs or groups to discuss an issue, solve a problem, or create a product. When students work in pairs or groups, this might also include people from outside the classroom, students in other classes, students from another school, community members, or experts in the field. When students are working together, they can be working face-to-face or by using technology to share ideas or resources. Think about these situations and consider if the students are working together. Is it working together when pairs of students give each other feedback? Is it working together when students are working alone? Is it working together when a small group discusses an issue? Is it working together when a whole class discusses an issue? Is it working together when a student uses Skype to interview students in another town via the internet? Is it working together when students use OneNote to share their story drafts and give each other feedback? Is it working together when each student creates his or her own story and sends it to the educator for feedback? Now we will discuss the next idea, students having shared responsibility. Students have shared responsibility when they work in pairs or groups to develop a common product, design, or response. Shared responsibility is more than simply helping each other. Students must collectively own the work and be mutually responsible for its outcome. If the group work involves students or adults from outside the classroom, this qualifies as shared responsibility only if the students and the outside participants are mutually responsible for the outcome of the work. Now think about the following situations to determine if students have shared responsibility in the learning activity. Is it shared responsibility when students conduct a lab experiment together? Is it shared responsibility when students give each other feedback? Is it shared responsibility when a student works with a peer in another country to develop a joint website using Microsoft Office 365? Is it shared responsibility when a student interviews a peer in another country about the local weather? In a learning activity, if students give each other feedback, this implies that one student owns the work and the other is only helping. Now what we'd like you to consider is how you could redesign this learning activity so that students have shared responsibility. We would encourage you to go to the discussion section to share your views and ideas about this task redesign with others. Let's move on to discussing another idea about developing collaborative skills, which involves making substantive decisions together. Students make substantive decisions together when they must resolve important issues that will guide them as they work together. Substantive decisions are decisions that shape the content, the process, or the product of the student's work. When we refer to content, what this relates to is that students must use their knowledge of an issue to make a decision that affects the academic content of their work together, such as taking a stance on a topic that they will then write about, or deciding on a hypothesis that they will test. With regards to process, this means students must plan what they will do, when to do it, what tools they will use, or the roles and responsibilities of people on the team. Finally, when referring to product, this means that students must make fundamental design decisions that affect the nature and usability of their product. Now I want you to think about the following situations to determine if students are making substantive decisions. Are students making substantive decisions if they work together to identify capital cities of particular countries in Europe? Are students making substantive decisions if they are working in teams to prepare a debate and decide what side of the issue they will argue for? Are students making substantive decisions if pairs of students are developing a presentation about climate change and must decide what causes to write about? Are students making substantive decisions if pairs of students choose which animal they will study? Are students making substantive decisions if student teams are conducting a research project and must decide on their own work plan and roles on the team? Are students making substantive decisions if student teams assign roles to team members based on the list of roles that the educator has identified? Are students making substantive decisions if pairs of students decide how to shape their presentations to a particular audience? Are students making substantive decisions if pairs of students select a colour scheme for their presentation? Now we will discuss the final idea about developing collaborative skills, which is focused on designing learning activities which requires interdependent work by students. Students' work is interdependent when all students must participate in order for the team to succeed. Too often, a group of students may share responsibility for an outcome, but in practice, the work is not divided fairly. In reality, one or two students may do all the work for the team. It can be challenging to design learning activities that require the participation of all students. To meet this criterion, students must be required to produce an interdependent product. This could be a presentation that they could each share in developing and presenting. Or it could be that students are responsible for other interdependent outcomes, such as a decision that requires information that is distributed across all the students. Most interdependent work involves two levels of accountability. First, there is individual accountability. This means that each individual on the team is responsible for a task that he or she must complete in order for the group to do its work. Therefore, the role of each student on the team is essential. Secondly, there is group accountability, which means that the students must work together to produce the final product or outcome. Students must negotiate and agree on the process, design, and conclusions of their work. It is important that the work is structured in a way that requires students to plan together and take the work of all team members into account so that their product or outcome is completed and fits together. For example, if each student is responsible for a page of a presentation, and in the final presentation the pages are just simply assembled together, this is not considered interdependent. The final presentation is considered interdependent only if the students' contributions work together to tell a story or communicate an overarching idea. In this case, students' individual pages must be designed as parts of a coherent whole. Think about the following situations to determine if students' work is interdependent. Group members each research a different internal system of frogs, for example, circulation, digestion, etc. Students then work together to dissect a frog and write a lab report about the dissection, identifying frog parts and the systems to which they belong. Is students' work interdependent if group members work together to research frogs, but each student conducts their own dissection and writes their own lab report? Is students' work interdependent if students each use their own networked device to contribute coordinate points that must collectively create the shape of a star? Is students' work interdependent if one student uses a device to plot coordinate points and create a star shape with input from group members? Is students' work interdependent if students create a tourist website presenting the history, culture, attractions and accommodation of their local area? In a learning activity, if students each create a web page about the history, culture, attractions or accommodations of their local area that will then be linked to the class homepage, they do not have to strategize together in any particular way. Now, what we'd like you to consider is how you could redesign this learning activity so that the students' work is interdependent. We would encourage you to go to the discussion section to share your views and ideas about this task redesign with others. In this lesson, we have discussed some of the big ideas about collaboration and what it could look like in the classroom. In the next unit, we will introduce a framework to remind you of the different types of collaboration and how this could be used to help design learning activities to develop your students' collaborative skills.